The Valorian Galactic Naval Academy floated in the endless dark of space like a city made of light and metal. And inside its massive halls walked the children of 100 different worlds. All of them dreaming of becoming officers in the Allied fleets. All of them carrying the hopes of their families and their species on their young shoulders. Guthrie pressed himself against the wall of the corridor as a group of senior cadets walked past, their heavy footsteps making the floor vibrate beneath his sensitive feet. And he waited until they were gone before he continued toward the navigation laboratory, where he spent most of his free time. He was Selenari, which meant his skin glowed with soft blue light when he was calm and flickered with purple when he was afraid. And right now it was flickering just a little because he never felt truly safe in these hallways. The Selenari were a small species, amphibian in nature, with large dark eyes and delicate limbs built for swimming through the warm oceans of their homeworld rather than walking through metal corridors. And Guthrie was small even for his kind. Barely reaching the chest of most other cadets, he had come to this academy on a scholarship because his family could not afford the fees that other families paid without thinking. And everyone knew it, and that knowledge followed him like a shadow wherever he went. Navigation lab was empty when he arrived, which was exactly how he liked it, and he settled into his favorite seat and pulled up the star charts he had been studying, losing himself in the mathematics of faster-than-light travel and the beautiful patterns of hyperspace routes. This was where he belonged. Not in the social gatherings, where cadets formed alliances based on family names and political connections. Not in the combat training halls, where his small body was a constant disadvantage. But here among the numbers and the stars, where his mind could finally be free, was so focused on his work that he did not notice the door open behind him, and he did not notice the figure that stepped inside until a tray was set down on the table. Next to him, with a soft sound, Guthrie jumped, his bioluminescence flashing bright purple with fear. And he spun around to see who had invaded his sanctuary. It was a human. She stood there looking at him with an expression he could not read, holding 2 cups of what smelled like the bitter drink humans called coffee. And she was wearing the same cadet uniform as everyone else, but somehow she made it look different. More like armor than clothing. Her name was Myra Vasquez. And Guthrie knew who she was, because everyone at the academy knew who the humans were. There were only 3 of them. 3 representatives from the planet called Earth, which was classified as a Class 12 Deathworld in the Galactic Registry. And that classification meant something terrible to everyone who understood Ida. Deathworld was a planet that actively tried to kill everything living on it. A planet with extreme gravity and violent weather and predators around every corner, and diseases that evolved faster than medicine could cure them. And Earth was one of the worst. The humans had not just survived on that nightmare world. They had conquered it, and they had done it without the gentle guidance of older species or the technology that made life easier for everyone else. And that fact made the other cadets very nervous. Myra Vasquez did not look dangerous at first glance, not to Guthrie anyway, because she was shorter than some of the other species, and her body did not have claws or armor plates or venomous spines. But there was something in the way she moved that made his instincts whisper warnings. She moved like she was always ready for something to attack, like every step was calculated to keep her balanced and prepared. And her eyes were constantly scanning the room even when she seemed relaxed. "You forgot to eat again," she said. And her voice was flat and quiet, almost emotionless. But the words themselves were strange. Guthrie blinked at her with all 3 of his eyelids, confused by what she meant. "I have been watching you," Myra continued. And she pushed one of the cups toward him, along with a nutrition bar from her pocket. "You come here every day, and you work until the lights dim for night cycle, and you never stop for food. And that is not healthy. Why do you care?" Guthrie asked, and his voice came out higher than he wanted it to, squeaking slightly with surprise. Myra shrugged. which was a human gesture that could mean many things. And she sat down in the chair across from him without asking permission. "I noticed things," she said simply. "And I noticed you." Kethri did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. And they sat in silence for a long moment while the star charts glowed on the screen between them. He had seen her before. Of course, always sitting alone in the mess hall, while other cadets gave her table a wide space. Always walking by herself through the corridors, while others moved out of her way without even realizing they were doing it. And he had thought that maybe they had something in common. Two outcasts in different ways, but he had never expected her to speak to him. "Your work is impressive," Myra said, nodding toward the screen. "I looked at the root calculations you submitted last week, and they were better than anything the senior cadets produced. And I think the instructors know it too, even if they do not say it. You read my submissions?" Kethri asked. "I told you," Myra replied. "I noticed things." She stood up then, picking up her coffee cup and turning toward the door. And Kethri thought she was going to leave without another word. But she stopped at the threshold and looked back at him. "Eat the food," she said. "And be careful in the lower corridors near the maintenance section. Because I've noticed some other things too, things that are not as pleasant. And I think you should stay away from there when you can." Then she was gone, and Kethri was alone again with his star charts and his confusion and a nutrition bar that he found himself eating without really thinking about. I did not understand the human girl or why she had spoken to him, or what she meant about the lower corridors. But somewhere deep in his chest, he felt something strange. Something that might have been the beginning of hope. He was wrong about what it meant. But he did not know that yet. He would learn soon enough. The Torvins were impossible to ignore, and everyone at the Academy knew it. And everyone at the Academy feared them in some way or another, even if they never admitted it out loud. They were massive creatures, standing nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 powerful arms covered in thick scales that could stop a knife blade. And their eyes were cold and yellow, and filled with the confidence of a species that had conquered their entire home system through pure military force. Vrexel was the worst of them, the leader of a small group of senior cadets who had decided that the Academy belonged to them, and that everyone else was simply living in their territory by permission. His family was powerful in the Torvin Dominion, connected to the military council that ruled their people with iron authority. And that power had followed him here like a weapon he could use whenever he wanted. The instructors knew what he was doing. Everyone knew what he was doing, but no one stopped him, because stopping him would mean making enemies with his family. And no one wanted that kind of trouble. Akiri learned this the hard way during his 3rd week at the Academy when Vrexel first noticed him in the combat training hall. The Selenari were a peaceful species, pacifists who believed that violence was never the answer to any problem. And Kethri had been raised with these beliefs his entire life, taught that conflict only created more conflict, and that the wise being walked away from fights rather than engaging in them. This philosophy did not serve him well when Vrexel decided to make an example of him. "Look at this little glowing fish," Rexol had said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Swimming so far from home, pretending to be a soldier when everyone knows the Selenari are cowards who hide in their oceans and let others fight their wars." Kethri had said nothing, had simply lowered his eyes and waited for the moment to pass. And eventually, Vrexol had grown bored and moved on. But something had been established that day. Something terrible. The Torvin had found his target. After that, the harassment came in small ways at first, ways that could be dismissed as accidents or coincidences. And Kethri told himself that it was nothing, that it would pass. That patience and peace would see him through. His equipment disappeared from his locker and reappeared in damaged condition. His assignments were somehow corrupted before submission. His seat in the mess hall was always taken by the time he arrived, no matter how early he came. He reported nothing because reporting would only make things worse, and because his people did not believe in escalating conflicts, and because somewhere deep inside he was ashamed that he could not handle this himself. The other cadets saw what was happening, but they looked away, not because they were cruel, but because they were afraid. And fear made cowards of everyone. Eventually, Myra saw it too. She sat at her empty table in the mess hall and watched with those unreadable human eyes as Rexall knocked Kethra's tray from his hands for the third time that week. And she said nothing, but Catherine noticed that her hands had tightened around her own cup until her knuckles turned white. He wondered what she was thinking. This girl from the Deathworld, this creature whose ancestors had hunted and killed things far more dangerous than any Torvin. And he wondered if she felt the same helplessness that he felt. He did not know that helplessness was not something humans experienced the way other species did it. He did not know that when humans saw cruelty, something ancient and terrible woke up inside them. Something that their civilization had buried but never truly eliminated. Something that whispered about justice and protection, and the sacred duty to defend those who could not defend themselves. But he would learn the harassment grew worse as the weeks passed, evolving from petty cruelty into something more sinister. And Kethri found himself taking longer routes through the academy to avoid the corridors where Rexall and his friends liked to gather. He remembered Myra's warning about the lower corridors near the maintenance section, and he wondered how she had known, and he wondered what else she had noticed that others had missed. One evening he made the mistake of staying too late in the navigation lab, so focused on his work that he did not notice the time until the lights began to dim for night cycle. And when he finally left, he found his usual path blocked by a maintenance alert that forced him to take a different route. The corridor was empty and quiet, and the lights were dimmer here than they should have been. And Kethri felt his bioluminescence begin to flicker with the purple of fear as he walked faster and faster toward the safety of the dormitory section. Almost made it? Well, said a voice from the shadows, and Rexall stepped out from a doorway with 3 of his friends behind him, their yellow eyes gleaming in the dim light. The little fish is swimming in dangerous waters. Kethri tried to run, but they were faster than him. And within seconds, he was surrounded, their massive bodies blocking every possible escape route, their 4 arms reaching toward him like the bars of a cage. "We have been watching you," Rexall said, leaning down until his face was close to Kethri's. "Running away from us, hiding in your little lab, thinking you are safe. But you are not safe, little fish. You were never safe. Please," Kethri said. And he hated how weak his voice sounded, how pathetic he felt. "I have done nothing to you. I just want to study and learn and become an officer. Please just leave me alone." "Done nothing?" Rexall laughed, and it was an ugly sound. "Your species exists. That is enough. Your ancestors stood against my people 100 years ago, and we have not forgotten. We will never forget. And every Selenari I meet will learn what it means to oppose the Torvin Dominion." This was not about him. Kethri realized with a cold shock. This was not about anything he had done or said or even thought. This was about old hatred and old wars and blood grudges that had been passed down through generations like poisoned inheritance. There was nothing he could do to make it stop. "Tomorrow night," Rexall said, "you will come to the maintenance section alone, and you will kneel before me and submit in the old way of my people. And if you do not come, if you try to hide or report this to anyone, then what happens next will be much worse than kneeling." He smiled then, showing rows of sharp teeth, and Kethri felt something break inside him. Some last piece of hope that he had been holding on to. "Do you understand, little fish?" Kethri nodded, his bioluminescence flickering wildly, his body trembling with fear and shame. "Good," Rexall said. "Very good. Then they were gone, disappearing into the shadows as if they had never been there. And Kethri was alone in the dim corridor with the taste of fear in his mouth and the weight of tomorrow pressing down on his shoulders. He did not sleep that night. He did not know that someone else was not sleeping either. Someone who had noticed the Torvins gathering near the maintenance section. Someone whose ancient instincts were beginning to whisper that a hunt was coming and that she would need to be ready. Myra Vasquez sat in her room in the dark, thinking about predators and prey, and waiting for the moment when she would have to choose what kind of creature she truly was. The next day passed like a nightmare that Kethri could not wake from, every hour bringing him closer to the moment he dreaded, every minute feeling like sand slipping through his fingers too fast to catch. He went to his classes, but he did not hear what the instructors said. He walked through the corridors, but he did not see the faces of the cadets around him. He sat in the mess hall, but he did not taste the food he forced himself to eat. All he could think about was the maintenance section and what waited for him there. He thought about reporting what had happened, about going to the instructors and telling them everything, but he knew what would happen if he did. He knew that Vrexel's family would make the problem disappear, and that the Torvin would make him pay for speaking out. He thought about hiding, about locking himself in his room and refusing to come out. But he knew that would only delay the inevitable, that they would find him eventually, that the punishment for disobedience would be worse than whatever they had planned. He thought about running away, about leaving the academy and returning to his homeworld in shame. But he knew that would mean giving up everything he had worked for, every dream he had ever had of becoming something more than what his circumstances said he could be. The end he went because he could not think of any other choice, because his people had taught him to endure rather than fight, because some part of him still believed that if he just gave them what they wanted, then maybe they would finally leave him alone. He was wrong. But he did not know that yet. The maintenance section was deep in the lower levels of the academy, far from the busy corridors where instructors and cadets went about their daily routines. And the lights down here were old and flickering and cast strange shadows on the metal, while Skithri's bioluminescence was pulsing with fear as he walked, purple light flashing across his skin in patterns that he could not control. And he felt small and alone and helpless in a way that he had never felt before. They were waiting for him in a storage room at the end of a long corridor, a room that was not monitored by the security systems, a room where no one would hear what happened. Ned Vreckle stood in the center of the room with his 3 friends, arranged around him like soldiers at attention. And when Kethri stepped through the doorway, they all smiled with their sharp teeth gleaming in the dim light. "You came," Vrexel said, and he sounded pleased, almost proud. "I was not sure you would, little fish. I thought perhaps you would run away and hide like your coward ancestors." "I am here," Kethri said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "I did what you asked, please. Can we just get this over with? Get this over with?" Vrexel laughed, and his friends laughed with him. "You think this is something to rush through? You think this is some simple transaction? No, little fish, this is a lesson. And lessons take time to teach properly." He stepped forward, his massive body blocking out the light behind him. And Kethri had to force himself not to step back, had to remind himself that running would only make things worse. "Kneel." Vrexel commanded. Kethri's legs trembled, but he did not move. Could not move, because something inside him was fighting against the command, even though his mind was telling him to obey, even though every logical thought said that submission was the only way to survive. "I said kneel." Vrexel roared, and one of his 4 arms shot out and grabbed Kethri by the shoulder, squeezing hard enough to make him cry out in pain. The other Torvins moved closer, surrounding him, cutting off any possibility of escape. And Kethri felt tears beginning to form in his large dark eyes as the pressure on his shoulder increased. "You will submit to me," Vrexel hissed, his face close enough that Kethri could smell his breath. You will kneel and you will beg for my mercy, and you will admit that your species is inferior to mine. And if you do not, then I will break every bone in your pathetic little body." The grip tightened and Kethri heard something crack, felt white-hot pain shoot through his shoulder, and a scream tore from his throat before he could stop it. "Please," he cried, and the word came out broken and desperate. "Please stop. I will do what you want, just please. Please stop hurting me." His legs gave out and he fell to his knees. Not in submission, but simply because he could no longer stand, and the tears were flowing freely now, his bioluminescence flickering wildly between purple and white, the colors of fear and pain. "That is better," Rexel said, releasing his grip. "Much better. Now say the words, admit that you are nothing, that your species is nothing, that you exist only because we allow it." Kethri opened his mouth to speak, to say whatever they wanted him to say, to surrender whatever pride he had left if it would just make the pain stop, but before the words could come out, he heard footsteps in the corridor behind him. Everyone heard them. They were not the heavy footsteps of a Torvan, or the quick steps of a Selenari, or the clicking steps of any other species that Kethri recognized. They were something else, something measured and deliberate. Something that sounded like the approach of a predator who was not trying to hide. The doorway was behind Kethri, so he could not see who was coming, but he could see the faces of the Torvans. And for the first time since he had met them, he saw something other than cruelty in their eyes. He saw uncertainty. Myra Vasquez stepped into the room. She stood in the doorway with her arms at her sides, her posture relaxed in a way that somehow looked more dangerous than if she had been holding a weapon. And her eyes moved across the scene with the cold calculation of a hunter assessing her prey. "Let him go," she said. Her voice was flat, emotionless, quiet, but it carried through the room like a command, like a promise, like a threat. Rexel recovered quickly, his uncertainty transforming into anger at being interrupted, and he drew himself up to his full height, towering over the small human female who had dared to intrude. "This is not your concern." "Human," he growled, "walk away and pretend you saw nothing. This is Torvan business." "No," Myra said, just that one word. Nothing more, but Kethri saw her weight shift slightly, saw her hand relax even further, and he realized with a shock that she was not afraid. She should have been afraid. Any sane creature would have been afraid, facing 4 Torvans who were each twice her size. But there was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation in her stance. Nothing but cold determination. "Do you know who I am?" Rexel demanded, taking a step toward her. "Do you know who my family is? Do you know what will happen to you if you interfere with me?" "I know exactly who you are," Myra replied. "You are a coward who hurts people smaller than yourself because it makes you feel powerful. And I am telling you for the last time to let him go. Or what?" Rexel laughed, spreading all 4 of his arms in a gesture of mockery. "What will you do, little human? What can one of you possibly do against 4 of us?" Mira smiled then, and it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of something ancient and hungry. Something that had spent millions of years learning how to kill things bigger and stronger than itself. Something that had never stopped being a predator, no matter how civilized it pretended to be. "You are about to find out," she said, and then she moved. Kethri had never seen anything move so fast. One moment Mira was standing in the doorway with that terrible smile on her face, and the next moment she was across the room, and her fist was driving into the throat of the Torvan nearest to her with a sound like a hammer. Striking meat, the Torvan made a choking noise and stumbled backward, all 4 of his arms clutching at his damaged throat. And before anyone could react, Myra was already moving again, spinning toward the second Torvan with her leg rising in an arc that caught him in the side of his head. He went down hard, crashing into a stack of storage containers with enough force to dent the metal. Amira did not even watch him fall. She was already looking at her next target with those cold predator eyes. All of this happened in less than 3 seconds. Guthrie's datapad had fallen from his pocket when he collapsed, and it was still recording, still capturing everything that was happening in the dim light of the storage room. And later he would watch this footage over and over again, trying to understand what he was seeing. The third Torvin was smarter than his friends. He had already started moving toward Myra before she finished with the second one, all 4 of his arms reaching out to grab her and crush her the way his species had crushed so many enemies before. But Myra did something impossible. She ducked under his grasp, moving lower than any creature with a spine should be able to move. And her hand shot up and grabbed one of his wrists and twisted in a way that made a horrible cracking sound. The Torvin screamed. It was a sound Guthrie had never heard before, a sound of pure agony, and before the scream had finished, Myra had already dislocated the shoulder of a second arm. Leaving the massive warrior with only 2 functional limbs, she kicked him in the knee and he went down. And she kicked him again in the head and he stopped moving. 4 seconds since the fight had started. 3 Torvins on the ground. And Myra was not even breathing hard. Rexall stood alone. The main leader of the Torvin cadets was finally beginning to understand his mistake. Finally beginning to see the truth that his species had somehow forgotten in the centuries since humans had joined the galactic community. Humans were not weak, because they were small. Humans were not harmless, because they lacked claws and scales and venomous spines. Humans were the most dangerous thing to ever crawl out of the evolutionary pit of a Class 12 Deathworld. And they had gotten that way by learning to kill things much bigger and stronger than themselves. "Stay back," Rexall said. And there was fear in his voice now, real fear. The kind of fear that his ancestors must have felt when they faced predators in the wild, before their species learned to use weapons. "I am warning you, my family will destroy you. They will destroy everyone you have ever cared about. Your family is not here," Myra said, walking toward him slowly, deliberately, giving him time to feel the fear build in his chest. "Your friends are not going to help you. No one is going to save you. It is just you and me now." She stopped in front of him, so small compared to his massive frame, and she looked up at him with an expression that was almost calm. "You made him beg," she said quietly. "I heard him begging you to stop. I heard the fear in his voice. And I want you to know something before this is over." "What?" Rexall whispered. "I do not beg," Myra said. "And neither should he have had to." Rexall attacked. He was fast for his size, and his remaining arms came at Myra from multiple angles at once, trying to overwhelm her with the advantage of numbers that his species had evolved over millions of years. It was not enough. Myra caught one of his wrists and used his own momentum against him, pulling him forward and off balance, while her other hand drove into a pressure point that the Torvin briefings probably said humans should not know about. His arm went numb. She twisted under his falling body, avoiding his desperate grab with the grace of a dancer, and her elbow crashed into the vulnerable spot where his neck met his skull. He staggered. She grabbed another wrist and twisted it until the joint gave way. And Rexall screamed the same way his friend had screamed, the sound echoing off the metal walls of the storage room. He fell to his knees, cradling his broken wrist against his chest, and Myra stood over him with her foot positioned to strike if he tried to rise. "Please," Rexall gasped, and the words sounded strange coming from his mouth. "Unfamiliar. Please stop." "Oh," Myra said, and her voice was as cold as the void between stars. "Now you want to beg. Now you understand what it feels like. Now you know the helplessness that you made him feel." She leaned down until her face was close to his, close enough that he could see the ancient hunger in her eyes, the predator instinct that millions of years of civilization had never truly eliminated. "On my world we have a saying," she whispered. "Do not start fights you cannot finish, And you started this, Rexel? You started it the moment you decided to hurt someone who could not fight back. I will not do it again, Rexel said. And he meant it. He truly meant it. I swear I will never touch him again. That is not enough, Myra replied. Because it is not just about him, is it? You have been doing this to others. You have been using your family name and your size and your power to make yourself feel big by making others feel small. She grabbed his broken wrist and squeezed just enough to remind him of the pain. If I ever hear about you hurting anyone again, she said. If I ever see you threatening someone who cannot defend themselves, if I even hear a rumor that you have gone back to your old ways, I will come for you. And next time, she continued, her voice dropping even lower, I will not stop at broken bones. She released him and stepped back, and Rexel collapsed onto the floor, gasping and shaking and looking at her with the eyes of prey that has finally understood its place in the food chain. Myra turned to Kethri, who was still on his knees where he had fallen, still trembling, still trying to understand what he had just witnessed. Her expression changed. The cold predator look faded from her eyes and was replaced by something softer, something almost gentle, and she walked over to him and knelt down so that they were at the same level. Can you walk? She asked, and her voice was different now too. Warmer, more human. Kethri nodded, though he was not sure if it was true. Myra helped him to his feet, careful not to touch his injured shoulder, and she looked at the damage the Torvins had done with anger flickering in her eyes. We need to get you to the medical bay, she said. Can you make it if you lean on me? Why? Kethri asked, and his voice was barely audible. Why did you help me? Mira looked at him for a long moment, and something passed across her face, something complicated, something that Kethri did not fully understand. Because I could, she said simply. Because you needed help and I was able to give it. Because that is what we do. That is what humans do when we see someone who is hurting. She put her arm around him, supporting his weight, and began to guide him toward the door behind them. Rexel was still on the floor, and his friends were beginning to stir. And none of them made any move to stop Mira from leaving with Kethri. They'd learned their lesson some. Things were more dangerous than they appeared, and the girl from the Deathworld was one of them. The recording went viral within Horse. Kethri did not release it himself. He was too injured and too overwhelmed to even think about such things. But his datapad had automatically backed up to the Academy network, and someone found the file and shared it, and then everyone shared it. And by morning, there was not a single cadet who had not seen what happened in that storage room. They watched a human girl, small and seemingly fragile, dismantle 4 Torvin warriors in less than 30 seconds. And they watched her stand over the leader of the most feared group in the Academy and make him beg for mercy, the same way he had made others beg. The administrators tried to contain the situation, but it was too late. The footage had already spread beyond the Academy to other stations and other worlds. And suddenly, everyone was talking about the human from Earth who had defended a Selenari cadet against impossible odds. There were inquiries, of course, formal investigations and official hearings where Rexel's family tried to claim assault and demand punishment for Myra Vasquez, but the evidence was clear. The footage showed everything. The harassment, the violence, the broken shoulder, the desperate pleas for mercy. And it showed a single human responding not with cruelty but with justice, stopping the attack and protecting someone who could not protect himself. Rickle and his friends were expelled from the Academy. Their careers ended before they had truly begun. Their family names attached forever to the footage of their defeat and their cowardice. Myra received an official reprimand for violent conduct, a mark on her record that would follow her for years. But she also received unofficial commendations from 3 different instructors who had known what Rexel was doing and had felt helpless to stop it. Themselves, she did not seem to care about either one. Kai spent a week in the medical bay while his shoulder healed. And during that week, he had many visitors, cadets who had been afraid to speak to him before, but who now wanted to know him. Wanted to be associated with the Selenari, who had been saved by the famous human girl. He was polite to all of them, but he did not feel connected to any of them. He knew they were not there for him. They were there for the story, for the excitement, for the reflected glory of being close to something dramatic. Only one visitor came, because she actually cared. Myra appeared on his third day in the medical bay, stepping through the door with her usual quiet grace and sitting down in the chair beside his bed, without asking permission. "How's your shoulder?" she asked. "Better," Kethri replied. "The doctors say it will heal completely. They say Selenari bones are flexible and recover quickly." "Good," Myra said. And she nodded once, a short, sharp movement. "That is good." They sat in silence for a moment, and Kethri found that the silence was not uncomfortable. It was almost peaceful, like being in a navigation lab late at night with nothing but the star charts for company. "Everyone is talking about you," he said finally. "You are famous now, the human who fought 4 Torvins and won." "I do not want to be famous," Myra replied, and there was something tired in her voice. "I did not do it for fame or recognition or any of that. I did it because it needed to be done." "Why?" Kethri asked, and it was the same question he had asked before, the question he still did not fully understand. "Why did you help me? Why did you risk so much for someone you barely knew?" Mira was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "On Earth," she said, "we have many predators. We have creatures that hunt in the dark, and creatures that hunt in the light, and creatures that would eat us without a second thought if they could catch us. And we survived not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we learned to protect each other." She looked at him with those strange human eyes. Eyes that could shift from cold predator to warm friend in an instant, pack bonding. The other species call it, like it is some kind of trick or weakness. But it is not a weakness. It is the thing that made us survive. It is the thing that made us go from hunted prey to the dominant species on a Deathworld. "But I am not part of your pack," Kethri said quietly. "I am not human. I am not anything to you." "That is where you are wrong," Myra replied. And she smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine, and nothing like the predator smile she had shown Vrexel. "Humans do not just protect our own species. We protect whoever we decide belongs with us. And I decided you belonged with me the moment I saw you alone in that navigation lab, working harder than anyone else to prove that you deserve to be here." She reached out and took his hand, her grip gentle but firm, and Kethri felt his bioluminescence shift to a color he had not shown in a long time. A soft, warm yellow that his people associated with trust and acceptance. "You are my friend," Myra said simply. "And I protect my friends. That is what humans do. That is what I do. And if anyone ever tries to hurt you again, they will have to go through me first." Kethri did not know what to say, so he simply held her hand and let the warmth of her words wash over him like the currents of his homeworld after he was released from the medical bay. Things were different. He still spent most of his time in the navigation lab, still preferred the company of star charts and calculations to the noise of social gatherings. But now there was someone who sat with him, someone who brought coffee and nutrition bars and made sure he did not forget to eat. Myra did not talk much, and Kethri did not mind. They had found a rhythm that worked for both of them, a quiet companionship that did not require constant conversation to feel meaningful. Other cadets watched them with curiosity and something like awe. The strange pair of outcasts who had become inseparable. The tiny Selenari and the Deathworld girl who had shown everyone what it meant to be human and across the galaxy, on stations and ships and worlds that Kethri had never visited. The footage from that storage room continued to spread, and the species of the Allied fleets began to understand something they had not fully grasped before humans were dangerous. Yes, everyone knew that, but their danger was not just in their strength or their speed or their persistence. It was in their loyalty, in their fierce protective instinct, in their willingness to fight and bleed and die for creatures that were not even their own species. They called it pack bonding. Like it was something simple, something that could be explained in a xenobiology textbook. But it was so much more than that. It was the reason humans had survived their Deathworld. It was the reason they had crossed the void between stars. It was the reason that a small human girl had walked into a room full of enemies and said, "Let him go," and meant it with every fiber of her. Being in the final scene of this chapter of their story, Kethri and Mira sat together in the observation deck of the academy, watching the stars spin slowly past the transparent walls. "Thank you," Kethri said softly. "For everything," Mira shrugged. "That human gesture that meant so many things at once. You would do the same for me," she replied. "I know you would, even if you do not believe it yet. You would find a way." Kethri was not sure she was right, was not sure he had that kind of courage inside him, but he wanted to be the kind of person who would. And maybe that was the first step. What happens now? He asked. Mira looked at him with that warm smile that transformed her face from predator to friend. "Now we study," she said. "Now we train. Now we become the officers we came here to be. And when we graduate, we go out into the galaxy together, and we show everyone what happens when a Deathworld girl and a Selenari navigator decide to watch each other's backs." "Together?" Kethri asked, and the word felt strange and wonderful on his tongue. "Together," Mira confirmed. "That is what pack means. That is what friends means. We face whatever comes side by side, and we do not let anyone hurt each other." And in that moment, watching the stars with his unlikely friend beside him, Kethri understood something profound. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, and full of creatures who would prey on the weak if given the chance. But it was also full of wonders, full of connections that crossed the boundaries of species and origin and expectation. Full of people like Mira who would fight for a stranger simply because it was the right thing to do. Humans were terrifying, yes, but they were also beautiful in their fierce loyalty and their stubborn insistence on protecting those they cared about. And somehow, against all odds, one of them had decided to care about him. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.